I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but today's world is a far cry from the magical worlds that we can read about in fantasy novels. Instead of eating our meals surrounded by friends at a local tavern, we spend much of our meals alone in our office eating microwave leftovers. If not that, then we might be satiating ourselves on whatever sounds the most appealing from the nearby fast food joint, despite how greasy it might be. This way of eating is not necessarily bad. I, for one, do love the french fries from the Golden Arches, but it really does prevent us from connecting with our friends and family over a meal, and even from connecting with our meals themselves. Now, what I mean by this is making food can, and in my opinion, should be a lovely experience that puts you in charge of what you take into your body, and when we can live in the moment and be present during the preparation of our food, I truly believe that it can change cooking from a chore that we have to do at the end of the day into something a little bit more whimsical that we have the opportunity to take part in. Hello and welcome to today's video. My name is Shay Madeline and I am an artist, a crafter, and a hobby enthusiast who recently has been doing her very best to make her life a little bit more whimsical, one piece at a time. The goal, of course, is to not have to break the bank, so I'm also trying to do it in a way that is affordable and to some extent even cheap. Now, the way in which I am trying to make my life a little bit more whimsical and magical on this day is that I'm going to try and step away from the fast food and easy meals, and instead I'm going to spend some time in the kitchen to make myself just a wonderfully glorious and yummy meal. The goal for today is to create 3 separate dishes which are all inspired by 3 different Studio Ghibli films. So I am bringing in a little bit of my anime interest into this video as well, but I still think that even if it's not necessarily fantasy themed, it can still be very whimsical and add a lot of joy into my everyday life. And of course, I did just go on a little bit of a rant about how today's meals and the way that we eat them doesn't really allow us to connect with our friends and family the way that maybe they should. So at the end of this process, I am going to sit down and eat this meal with my friends. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into today's video. Like I said, I am choosing dishes from 3 separate Studio Ghibli films, and these 3 movies will be Kiki's Delivery Service, Ponyo, and Spirited Away. Kiki's Delivery Service is going to be what inspires the dessert for this meal, and that is going to be the chocolate cake that you see within the film. And then for the side dish, that is inspired by the rice balls that come from Spirited Away. And then finally, the main entree is going to be the ramen that you see made in Ponyo that just looks so good every single time I watch that movie. So I tried recording a voiceover using my Raycon headphones and it did not work very well, so I'm just going to actually voice over it now, so just ignore all the yapping I'm doing. All I'm doing is setting up the video and telling you that I'm watching a Studio Ghibli film today to put me in the mood for what I'll be baking. Here are all the ingredients that I pulled out for the cake. One of the ingredients is coffee, you'll see, because this is kind of like a coffee flavored cake, just a little tiny bit to give it a little bit more richness, which I think added just a wonderful touch to the cake. So making this cake was pretty straightforward. The batter was just mixing all the wet ingredients together and then adding in the dry ingredients slowly. So I kind of skipped that first part. I had to make the cake twice because I made a 2-layer cake. What I'm doing right now is actually making the filling for the 2 layers of cake, so it is a whipped chocolate filling. To make the glaze for the cake, I actually used the exact same recipe, but I just didn't whip it, and then instead of making it fluffy, it leaves a nice glossy look as a final result on the cake. Putting the 2 layers of cake together was actually one of the more enjoyable parts of this process in my opinion. I've never made a multi-layered cake before. I've always just made like sheet pan cakes and then just thrown some frosting on there willy-nilly. So this was like a first time for me, and I also have never had even like a circular cake pan before, so that was also kind of cool. And overall, I thought it was really easy actually, and I thought it was gonna be a lot harder than it was, so I'm really happy that it turned out so well. And the filling in the middle just genuinely tasted so good to me, and then even just watching it back, it looks so good and fluffy as I put it on. But me and my boyfriend do just really enjoy fluffy frosting, so maybe that's me being a little bit biased. So now I am pulling the second layer of cake out of the oven, and you'll see me put it on top of my first layer real quick. And like I said, this was such an easy process, and the nice part was that because I evened off both layers of cake, I got a yummy like top round bit of both cakes to eat, and that was a pretty fun part of the process as well. Finally though, this is what the 2-layer cake looks like before I put the glaze on top of it, which I am just pulling out right now. Once again, this is the exact same recipe that I used for the filling, minus the whipping step. Now when this glaze first started going on, I was kind of a little bit nervous because to me it looks really bumpy and I didn't think it was going to give it the kind of chocolatey finish that the cake has in the movie. But I was surprised because after I let it sit and cure, I guess, after this whole process, I thought it looked much better, which I will show you that later in the video. Unfortunately, I won't be able to show it cured until after I finish the cake bit. But for a while, at this point especially, I think it looks kind of weird. But I had just enough to stretch it over the entire cake, and at this point I was happy enough, especially once I flipped this cake over to a clean plate so that it was a little bit more presentable. Now the hardest step by far of this whole process was making these cute little toppers that are on top of the cake. I tried using white chocolate and a little bit of oil to make something that I could put into a piping bag and then pipe directly onto a wax piece of paper that could then go into the fridge or the freezer and freeze to be hard enough to put on top. Ultimately, I didn't make it thin enough to be able to pipe it, but I was able to do it with a spoon. It's a little bit messy looking, but I'm really happy with it, especially because I've been working on this all day. Just like with the cake, I pulled out all of the ingredients I would possibly need for the ramen I am making from Ponyo. And now you see I pulled out this pot so I could begin making the broth that is necessary to actually put the noodles in. Which, surprisingly enough, you don't actually boil the noodles in the broth with this recipe, at least with the one that I followed. Instead, you just kind of add the broth on top of the noodles after they're done cooking. To make it slightly more fancy than just plain old chicken broth, you do add a little bit of garlic and ginger, and then you let it simmer for about 15 minutes to get the aromatics just really going, and that doesn't really change the taste a whole lot, but it does add a little bit to it. The next step to this recipe was to season the bowls that you're putting the ramen into. So of course there was some soy sauce, some sesame oil, and then a whole lot of other things, and this process just adds all of the flavor that instead of putting in the broth, you put at the bottom of the bowl to add flavor to the noodles. So it goes the seasoning, noodles, and then broth on top, and you mix it all together at the end of the process. Never mind, I actually lied. It goes seasoning, broth, and then noodles. Now, before adding the broth into my bowls, I should have drained it from all of the ginger and the garlic that is still floating around, which you can actually see as I'm pouring it in. But I don't have a strainer that I thought would be small enough to get that out without losing all of my broth. So I just decided to leave it, and overall I think it tasted fine. I guess I'll have to ask my boyfriend if he thought it was fine, but I didn't get any complaints at all while we were eating the meal, so I'm pretty sure it was okay. Next up is my favorite part of the process of making the ramen, and that is putting all of the yummy toppings on it. So the toppings include half of a boiled egg, some ham, just like half of it, and then also some green onion. Now when it came to the ham, I did kind of burn one of the sides on accident, but I still think it tasted pretty good, and I'm someone that doesn't really like ham. I only put it on because that's what was requested from the movie, and I got ham steaks so that we wouldn't waste any if we had any extra in the end, because I just cut it up into pieces and it worked out pretty well. But like I was saying, I thought the ham was really good. And then adding the green onion to the broth on top of the noodles as well was also a super nice touch, and I think made it really pretty. And I'm super happy with how this part of the meal turned out. I think it looks phenomenal. Finally, I get to move on to the side dish, which is making those little rice balls that you see in Spirited Away. Granted though, these are not going to look that similar or necessarily even be the same thing. I'm just kind of making rice balls and saying that they're the Spirited Away rice balls. The ingredients that I decided to use were, of course, rice that I cooked to be sticky, although it is just white rice. And then I also shredded up some salmon that I had pan fried. And I think the salmon was super delicious in this meal, and I'm very glad that I added that, even though it kind of made my rice balls fall apart in the end. I wanted to add a strip of seaweed onto every rice ball because I wanted it to kind of seem more authentic, even though it definitely is not authentic in any way. And I actually found out that I really like seaweed after I tried this little dish that I made, so this was a fun experience just for learning that little fun fact. Now I am trying to form the rice balls. The way that I did this was I wet my hands and then I put some sea salt on my hands as well so I could try to add a little bit of flavor as I was putting the rice into a ball form. Now I really struggled with this, especially with the first one because I didn't make the ball quite big enough, but basically what I would do is I would roll a ball, put a little hole in it to stuff in some of the salmon, and then I would try to wrap it up with a strip of seaweed. As you can see, the first one did not work out very well, and honestly only one of them actually held a ball form at the end of it, but it was still really, really yummy even if they weren't necessarily the prettiest As you can see, at the time of making the second rice ball, the first one had completely fallen apart, and that is going to be the story for the next two that I make, but the last one actually held its shape pretty well, which you'll be able to see in the final results. So here is the finished result. You can see that there is ramen right in the middle, which I think looks really yummy and awesome. The rice balls, only one of them turned out great, like I said, but the cake looks phenomenal. And this is the final result that I got to show to my roommate and my friend. And then right after this, we devoured all of the food, which was a lot of food. We were really full afterwards. Ultimately, I'm super happy with how this project turned out. I thought the food all tasted very delicious, and honestly, it was awesome just to spend a whole day in the kitchen, or at least a lot of a day in the kitchen, and kind of get to be a little bit more touch in the food I was making and then the food I was eating as well. If I were to do this again, I think I would find a slightly different recipe for the cake just to make it a little bit less rich, but in the end, I am very happy, like I said. Now, if you made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching for this long. Please do consider liking and subscribing, and let me know what I should do for my next video. Thank you, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye!